The alarm was a physical blow, a high-frequency shriek that vibrated through the deck plates and into the marrow of his bones. It wasn't the klaxon of a breach or the wail of life support failure. It was the clean, sterile, utterly impersonal chime of an external proximity sensor, a sound designed not to incite panic, but to demand attention. In the dead silence of the Endeavor's bridge, it was a gunshot in a cathedral. Kael's reaction was automatic, a series of micro-movements drilled into him on 100 simulated battlefields, and one very real one. His back straightened, the muscles in his neck and shoulders coiling into knots of high tensile wire. His gaze snapped from the ghostly, frozen face of General Rostova on the command screen to the tactical holotank at the center of the bridge. His hand, already resting on the hilt of his sidearm, tightened until the polymer grip creaked in protest. The pressure in the room, already heavy with the psychic residue of a massacre and the literal smell of ozone and decay, suddenly tripled. It was the pressure of being seen. Identification, classification, threat assessment. The old mantras from officer training scrolled through his mind. Unbidden and unwelcome. Never assume rescue. Assume contact. Assume hostile. The hegemony didn't teach you to hope for the best. It taught you to prepare for the inevitable. And the inevitable was always violent. Report, he bid out, his voice a low rasp inside his helmet. The word was a hammer blow against the ringing of the alarm. Sloane had already moved, her lithe frame dropping into a low crouch behind a bank of secondary consoles. Her rifle was up, the muzzle tracking towards the forward view screen, which remained stubbornly black. She was a medic, but on Ganymede, medics were taught how to make casualties as well as treat them. Her efficiency was a small, cold comfort. Proximity alert, she stated, her voice tight but level over the local comm. Source is external, closing fast. I'm not getting a transponder code. Of course, she wasn't. A friendly would have hailed them from a light second out, broadcasting their intentions on all hegemony channels. This was a silent approach. A predator's approach. Jax was a wreck. The boy was curled against the base of the captain's chair, his hands pressed against the sides of his helmet, as if he could physically block out the intrusion. He was shivering, his breaths coming in ragged, shallow gasps that crackled over the comms like static. "They're loud," he whimpered, the words barely intelligible. So loud, cold. A clean, sharp knife. Kael's attention was split. A fractured, three-way partition between the tactical display, his squad, and the gnawing voice of his own paranoia. He moved to the holotank, his mag boots clanking with grim finality on the grated floor. With a sweep of his hand, he activated the external sensors. A schematic of the Endeavor shimmered into existence, a wounded, skeletal thing adrift in the void. And there, less than 5 kilometers off their port bow, was the contact. A single blocky icon rendered in hostile red. It pulsed in time with the alarm. "Give me a profile," he ordered, his fingers dancing across the control surface, forcing the dead ship's archaic systems to respond. The processors groaned, slow and reluctant, like a dying man forced to speak. Data scrolled across the tank. Designation: Inquisitor-class recovery vessel. Name: THS Ironclad. Kael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bridge's failing life support. An Inquisitor-class, not a search and rescue cutter, not a medical frigate. A recovery vessel, the kind they sent to pick through the bones of a battle, to secure sensitive technology and purge inconvenient truths. They were floating black sites, crewed by the Hegemony Security Bureau's most loyal and least scrupulous agents. The kind of ship that didn't carry rescue pods, it carried incinerators. "It's Hegemony," Sloane said, a note of confused relief in her voice. "We need to open a channel." "No," Kael snapped, the word sharper than he intended. He stabbed a finger at the holotank. "Look at their vector. They're not on a standard approach. They're positioning for a hard dock, a forced entry." His mind was racing, connecting dots that formed a constellation of pure dread. The rift, the damaged ship, Rostova's cryptic warning about a lie, the Cinder margin, and now, the arrival of the jackals, silent and swift. This wasn't a rescue. This was a cleanup operation, and they were the last pieces of dirt to be scrubbed away. "Kael, that's insane," Sloane argued, but the conviction in her voice was already wavering. "Why? Ask her," he muttered, gesturing to the frozen image of the general on the main screen. Rostova's eyes, wide with a horror that transcended death, seemed to stare right at him. "The lie is the war." Her words echoed in the tomb like silence of his helmet. He had to know. He had to have more than a ghost's dying whisper. The official logs were a bust, corrupted and wiped. But a ship like the Endeavor, a flagship carrying a high-ranking general, would have redundancies. Layers of data hidden from casual inspection. Black boxes within black boxes. His eyes scanned the command console, the captain's throne where a man had been left to die, his hand still fused to the armrest. Kael's gaze traced the lines of the console, the seams in the reinforced plasteel. Military hardware was built for function, but human paranoia always added its own flourishes. There, a hairline seam, almost invisible beneath the captain's armrest, right where the dead man's fingers had been pointing. It wasn't a standard panel. It was too small, too deliberately placed. A maintenance port, maybe. Or something else. Sloane, cover the main airlock corridor. "Jax, stay down and try to breathe," he commanded, his voice dropping into the low, steady tone of an officer taking charge. He saw Sloane hesitate, her visor turning towards him, 1,000 questions in that simple gesture. "Just do it," he added, a plea buried under the gravel of the order. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and ghosted away from the consoles, her rifle leading the way into the shadows of the corridor entrance. Kael knelt by the captain's chair. The smell was stronger here, the coppery tang of old blood, and the sharp, acrid scent of a plasma discharge. The crystalline growth that covered much of the crewman was thinner here, as if the energy of his death had seared it away. Kael took a deep breath, the recycler in his suit scrubbing the air, but not the memory of the stench. He ran a gauntleted finger along the seam. Nothing, no latch, no release. Think like them, he told himself. Think like an engineer who needs to hide something in plain sight. It wouldn't be a physical switch. It would be sequence locked. He looked at the control panel on the armrest, at the array of inert buttons. His eyes fell on the primary fire control, the comms switch, and the tactical display toggle. A triangle, the most stable shape in engineering. And in Hegemony iconography, it represented the three pillars: Earth, Mars, unity. Propaganda was baked into everything. He pressed them, one after another, in a swift, desperate sequence. A low click, barely audible, rewarded him. The small panel popped open by a millimeter. Kael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, nestled in a shock-proof casing, was a shielded data port. A ghost port. Not on any official schematic. A direct line to the ship's raw sensor and telemetry logs the unfiltered, unedited truth. He pulled his personal slate from his belt, the casing scratched and worn from 100 salvage jobs. It was obsolete by hegemony standards. But he'd rebuilt it himself. It was clean. No backdoors, no tracking software. It was his. He unspooled the shielded cable and jacked it into the port. The slate screen flickered to life, its soft blue glow a stark contrast to the bridge's angry red emergency lighting. Connection established. Accessing primary data core. A progress bar appeared. Aetherpen decrypting. 1% find EA, cold knot, formed in Kael. S. Stomach. This wasn't going to be fast. The ship's core data was locked down with military-grade encryption that would make a planetary AI pause. His little slate was trying to pick an electronic lock with a toothpick. Kael. Sloane's voice crackled over the comm, sharp with a new kind of urgency. You need to see this. He couldn't move. He felt tethered to the console, to the agonizingly slow crawl of the progress bar. Sci-Fi. I'm busy, Sloane. Just hold your position. No, you don't understand. It's the bridge. The damage. He heard her footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. She wasn't looking at the corridor anymore. She was looking at the room itself. I was looking at the blast patterns on the bulkheads. The scoring. Kael tore his eyes from the screen and followed her gaze. He'd seen the damage, of course, but he'd registered it as part of the overall chaos of a ship-to-ship battle. Just more wreckage. But Sloane saw it differently. Her medic's training wasn't just about bodies. It was about forensics, about understanding the mechanics of trauma. She pointed with the barrel of her rifle. Look there. by the science station. That's a plasma scorch, deep and localized. The molecular decay is consistent with a standard-issue Hegemony pulse rifle, fired at close range. She moved her aim slightly to the left, and there, that pitting on the wall behind the navigator's console. That's not shrapnel from an external explosion. Those are impacts from a flechette pistol. Hegemony Enforcer issue. The implications of her words fell into place like heavy, leaden blocks, building a wall that cut off any possibility of a simple explanation. He had assumed the crew had been killed by whatever alien entity had disabled the ship, or had died when the Endeavor crashed. But the evidence in front of him told a different story. They fought each other, he breathed, the words tasting like ash. They were executed, Sloane corrected, her voice chillingly precise. She knelt beside one of the cocooned crew members, her helmet light illuminating the crystalline shell. My bioscanner is picking up traces of sedative compounds in the crystal lattice. They were drugged, incapacitated. Then they were shot. The clean professional tone of the medic fell away, replaced by raw, unfiltered horror. Kael. They were lined up against the wall and murdered by their own. And 4% Tamanti. The number mocked him. The cold knife Jax had whimpered about wasn't on the Ironclad. It had already been here. It had been wielded by the crew of the Endeavor against themselves. A mutiny. A purge. General Rostova's message wasn't just a warning, it was a confession. A last testament. A new sound cut through the air, a loud, authoritative voice that boomed from the bridge's external speakers, bypassing their helmets. It was clear, crisp, and utterly devoid of warmth. THS Endeavor. This is Captain Valerius of the THS Ironclad. You are in a restricted sector. You have boarded a quarantined Hegemony asset without authorization. By the authority of the Hegemony Security Bureau, you are ordered to stand down your weapons and surrender immediately. The voice was a hammer of authority. Each word a perfectly modulated threat. There was no, "Are you survivors?" No, "Do you require assistance?" It was a verdict. Kael looked at Sloane. Her face, visible through her visor, was a pale mask of disbelief and dawning terror. He looked at Jax, who had gone completely silent, his small form rigid with a fear that was more than just human. Then he looked back at his slate. Hai de Fenjiwu. Hai. Identify yourselves. The voice of Valerius commanded, an edge of impatience creeping in. You have 60 seconds to comply before we initiate boarding procedures. Be advised, resistance will be met with lethal force. 60 seconds. An eternity. A heartbeat. Kael's mind, a place of bitter cynicism and buried trauma, became a vortex of frantic calculation. The data transfer was his only leverage, his only potential key to understanding why this crew was murdered and why the Hegemony was so desperate to cover it up. But it was too slow. Surrendering meant letting them seize the slate, letting them bury the truth forever. under a mountain of redacted reports and official lies. Resisting meant a firefight against a fully crewed Inquisitor-class vessel. A death sentence. Some wars are fought to be lost. The subtitle of a trashy novel he'd once salvaged. It had seemed profound and stupid at the time. Now, it felt like a prophecy. He couldn't win. He couldn't fight his way out. He couldn't escape. But he could choose the terms of his defeat. He could choose what he lost for. 100%. Endeavor, do you copy? Valerius's voice was like ice. 50 seconds. The truth, that was the prize. The sliver of data crawling onto his slate was worth more than his life, more than Sloane's, more than the terrified boy. Shivering on the floor, it was the only thing that mattered in this entire dead system. He looked at the frozen face of General Eva Rostova, at her silent, screaming mouth. He finally understood the horror in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of dying, it was the fear of being erased, of having her truth die with her. The weight of 1,000 atmospheres was nothing compared to the weight of one lie. His lie had cost him his career. Her lie had cost an entire crew their lives. And whatever lie the Ironclad was here to protect, it was big enough to sterilize a moon for. 30 seconds, Endeavor. The voice crackled, the politeness gone, replaced by the metallic certainty of violence. Kael keyed his own comm, not to the ship, but to his squad. His voice was steady, imbued with a calm he did not feel. It was the calm of a man who has run out of choices and found a strange, terrible freedom in that fact. Sloane, he said, barricade the door